Hi everyone, welcome to Nithrania Game Club. My name is Branislav Berec and you're watching Game in a Nutshell, a series of videos designed to teach how to play various board games. Today we're going to learn how to play Myraclia. It's a game designed by a Slovak designer Rudy Priečinský. It's a game for 2 to 5 players, and before we get going I have to say this is a prototype version. So all the components that you will see in the game are prototype components. However, the gameplay is final. And here's how it plays. To set up the game, place the drafting board, small player order board, and the scoring board in the middle of the table. Then take all the tiles, put them into the large bag, and draw 7 tiles in a 2-player game, 9 tiles in a 3-player game, 11 tiles in a 4-player game, and 12 tiles in a 5-player game. We will set up a 3-player game. You can either use the recommended layouts or you can create your own ones using the recommendations in the rulebook. Once the starting tiles are prepared, randomly draw 3 more tiles and place them at the bottom of the scoring track. These cubes are called elements, and on each player sheet you can find a scale of rarity of each element. Green element is the most common element, while the black and white elements are the most rare elements, white being considered rarer than the black one. At the beginning of the game, put all these cubes into the small bag. Each player will get a player sheet, 3 small discs with 1 symbol, 8 large discs with the same symbol, and in a 5-player game, each player will only get 7 discs. As we are setting up a 3-player game, players will have 8 discs. Finally, each player will draw 2 initial elements from the small bag. The color of these 2 cubes is very important because it will determine the starting player order. Looking at the rarity table, each player will pick more precious element from those 2 initial cubes. Now, looking at these selected elements, player with the most common element will go first. So take the small disc of this player and place it to the first position. If 2 players would have the same color, then compare the color of the second element. Again, yellow element is more common than the orange one, so this player would go second and the last player would be this one. Those 2 initial cubes are going back to the player sheets. The game of Myraclia is played in rounds, and each round has 2 phases. In the first phase, the drafting phase, players will draft these cubes or elements. In the second phase, the terraforming phase, players will use these elements to terraform Myraclia tiles and score victory points. At the start of the drafting phase, randomly draw 5 cubes per player. In a 5-player game, and only in the first round, draw 4 cubes per player. In all other subsequent rounds, normally draw 5 cubes per player. Sort all the cubes by color, and the group with the most cubes goes to the rightmost position on the drafting board. The group with the second most cubes goes to the second position, and so on and so forth. In case of a tie, again use the rarity scale, and the more common element goes first, with less common elements following. It may happen that some of the slots on the drafting board remain empty. In this drafting order, players will alternate taking turns, and on their turn they will take 1 cube. When the player takes the first cube, take another small disc and place it to the closest available circular spot to these cubes. So this player can take the red cube and place it next to his player sheet. Now, if the second player would also choose the red cubes, the closest available circular spot is this one, so he would have to place his disc to this spot, and now he can take the red cube. If the third player would decide to take the blue cube, he would place his disc to this spot, and now he can take the blue cube. Now it's this player's turn again. If he would decide to take the cube from the column where he has the disc, or from any columns to the right, the disc would stay where it is. However, if he wants to take any cube to the left of his current position, let's say he wants to have this blue one, he has to move the disc again to the closest available spot, and then he can take the cube and place it next to his player sheet. Other player's disc in the original column would slide up. If the second player would decide to take a yellow cube, again he has to move his disc, and now he can take the cube. Now if the third player would decide to take the yellow cube, the cube is to the right of his current position, so he can take the cube, but the disc stays where it is. Anytime during the drafting phase, a player may decide to pass. To mark this, player can offset the token a little bit. Once a player passes, this player can no longer participate in the draft this round. When all the players decide to pass, the drafting phase is over, and all the remaining cubes are placed into a discard pile. The drafting phase would also end when all the elements would be taken by the players. At the end of the drafting phase, the terraforming order will be determined by the position of players' discs on this drafting board. Starting with this arrow and following the line, take the first disc and place it to the first position on this terraforming order. For now, you can remove these small discs. So this player will be in the second position and this one in the third position. Now you can rotate this player order board, and this player will be the first one to terraform tiles in the next phase. In the terraforming phase, players will take turns given by this player order board. But this time, players will take full turns and then the round will be over. Players can perform up to 3 actions. They can terraform a tile, reserve a tile, and they can do these actions in any order and any combinations they want. In order to terraform a tile, player needs to discard the elements depicted on the tile. The first tile the player will terraform can be any free tile on the board. Free tile is a tile that has no player disc on it. So, if the player would decide to terraform this tile, he needs to discard these 3 elements, which he has to have available in his supply. Then he can take one of these large discs, and before he flips the tile, as this symbol indicates, this tile provides one blue released element, which the player receives immediately and places it next to the player sheet, and he would also immediately score 1 victory point. That would be marked on the scoring board. Now he can flip the tile. This side of the tile also contains the symbol for the free element and the symbol of the type of the terrain, which is relevant for the endgame scoring. All other tiles the player would decide to terraform must be adjacent to the already terraformed tile, either the tile terraformed by this player or by any other player. If the player would terraform this tile, he would have to discard the required elements. He can take the disc, and now this tile doesn't provide any released element, but the player would score 1 point immediately, and he would also score victory points for all his adjacent terraformed tiles. If this was the first terraformation action of the round, he would score 1 bonus victory point. If it is his second or third terraforming action of the round, he would score 2 bonus victory points for any of his adjacent terraformed tiles. Because this was his first action, this is the second terraforming action, so this tile is worth 2 bonus victory points. So it is 1 point for the tile itself and 2 bonus victory points. Again, the tile would be flipped to the terraformed side. If, instead of terraforming this tile, the player would decide to terraform this one, he would need to discard 1 green and 1 orange element. However, he doesn't have an orange element, but he has this wild power action. Anytime you have a missing element of any color, you can discard 3 elements of the same color to replace that missing element. So he would have the green element and the orange element would be replaced by these 3 green elements. All these elements would be discarded. However, the tile would provide 1 released green element, which the player can take immediately back and place it next to his player board, then take one of his discs and terraform the tile. This one doesn't provide any victory points. However, because it is his second terraformation action, he would score 2 bonus victory points for this tile. This part of the wild power says that if you want to replace an element of any missing color, you can use 5 elements of any color. So to terraform this tile, we could use a green element and 5 elements of any other color. When you decide to reserve a tile, again, it has to be adjacent to any other terraformed tile. Either your own terraformed tile or tile terraformed by other players. To reserve the tile, place at least one element from your supply onto that tile. Now you have to lose the victory points equal to the number of missing elements, so in this case 2. This is again marked on the scoring board. Losing the victory points for the missing elements is a one-time payment and will not occur in the subsequent round for this particular tile. Then take one of your discs and this time place it on a tile with this dark side up. The reserved tile is not a free tile anymore because it has a disc on it, and that's why this tile cannot be reserved or terraformed by any other player. If you wouldn't have enough victory points available, you cannot make the reservation. However, if you have to lose 2 points, you can go from 2 down to 0, but you cannot go from 1 to -1. During reservation, you cannot use these wild powers. This reservation is not time limited, so you can have the tile reserved for as long as you want. However, at any time during the game, you can have maximum 1 tile reserved. In addition, the reserved tile is not terraformed, so under these circumstances, you would not be able to start terraforming these 2 tiles because they are not adjacent to terraformed tile. During your turn, you can perform maximum 3 actions, but these actions are optional and you can perform fewer actions. When you're finished, place your unused elements to this exchange zone. These elements will be available for other players, as we will see in a minute. Then you will have to select and place new tiles to the game board. The number of tiles you have to place equals the number of discs you have placed on the game board this turn. So, because we have placed 3 discs on the game board, we have to add 3 more tiles. You can choose from the tiles displayed under the scoring board. You add the tiles one by one and in the order of your choice. When you add the tile to the game board, you have to meet 2 conditions. First condition says that the new tile has to be adjacent to at least 2 other tiles. So I wouldn't be able to place it like this because it is only adjacent to 1 tile. The second condition says that if the new tile is adjacent to only 2 other tiles, each of those tiles must be adjacent to at least 3 other tiles excluding the one added. So again, I wouldn't be able to place the new tile here because this tile is adjacent to 3 other tiles, but this one is only adjacent to 2 tiles. This one is excluded. So once the first tile is added to the game board, do not replenish the supply yet, you have to choose the next one from those 2 remaining. When adding the next tile, you have to follow the same placement rules. Note that when the new tile is adjacent to 3 or more tiles, you don't have to meet any other requirements. Only when you're finished adding all tiles to the game board, replenish the supply from the large bag. Now that the first player has finished his turn, it's time for a second player to take his turn. During his turn, the second player has one additional option which the first player didn't have, and that's the exchange. Anytime during his turn, the second player can exchange 1 cube from his supply with the cube from the exchange zone of any player who has already finished his turn this round. The exchange is always 1 element for 1 element, so even if the first player would have more elements available, the ratio has to be 1 to 1 all the time. The player currently taking turn can do as many exchanges as he wants. Again, the first tile that the second player would terraform can be any free tile on the game board. The free tile is the tile without these discs. So if he would decide to terraform this one, he has to discard the required elements, take one of his discs, score 2 victory points immediately, and then flip the tile and mark it with his own disc. All other tiles he would terraform must be adjacent to other terraformed tiles, either his own one or even the opponent's one. So the second player could easily terraform this or this tile. Now let's say he would be able to terraform this tile. In addition to 2 points for this particular tile, he would score bonus points for his adjacent terraformed tile, and because this is his second terraformation action, he would score 2 bonus victory points. However, all other players with a terraformed tile adjacent to the newly terraformed tile would score 1 victory point per tile. After the second player would finish his turn, it's time for the third player to take his turn. The third player can use the elements in the exchange zones of both players that have finished their turns before him. Again, he can only exchange the cubes 1 to 1. In the subsequent turns, players may decide to add elements to the reserved tiles. They have to take the element from their supply, add it to the reserved tile, and this is not considered an action. However, if player would add all the missing elements, again taking the cubes from his own supply, this would be considered a terraforming action. Player would have to discard all the used elements, flip the tile to its terraformed side and score normally. In a very rare situation, player may decide to change his reservation. Because at any time during the game, one player can have maximum 1 tile reserved, player can decide to change the reservation. He would place some elements on the reserved tile, pay the victory points for the missing elements, place the reserved disc on the new tile. However, the elements on the previously reserved tile stay where they are. Other players would be able to reserve the tile using the existing elements as if they would place those elements there, or by adding the missing resources, they could terraform the tile directly. When all players have taken their turns, it's the end of round. All players would discard all their unused elements. Small discs from the drafting board are returned back to the players. The player order board is rotated again to the drafting order, and you can slide the discs if you want. And players take the free elements from the discard pile and add it to their supply. If any player managed to terraform 7 tiles, or 6 in a 5-player game, or if there is not enough tile to replenish the tile supply, the game is over. Players will now calculate their scores. Players will take the number of victory points on the scoring board, plus 5 victory points if they manage to terraform at least 1 tile of each type, then add the victory points for each type of terrain that you have terraformed. For example, if you would terraform 3 plain tiles, you would get 3 victory points. If you would terraform 4 mountain tiles, you would score 13 victory points, and so on and so forth. Finally, add the points for the largest contiguous terraformed area. You can help yourself with the small player order board. The player with this symbol has the contiguous area of 5 adjacent terraformed tiles, and it is the largest area on the game board. This player has an area of 4 adjacent tiles. This is not terraformed, it's only reserved. So he has the second largest area, and the third player only has the contiguous area of 3 tiles. So he is in the last position. Now each player would score 3 points for any other player behind in this order. So this player would score 6 points, this player would score 3 points, and this player would score nothing. In case the third player would also have the contiguous area of 4 adjacent tiles, they would be at the same place with the other player, and the first player would still get 6 points because there are 2 players behind this player, but these 2 players would get 0 points because there is no one behind them in this player order. Now sum up all the points together, and whoever has the highest score is the winner. So that's how you play Myraclia. If you would have any questions or comments, please put them into the comment sections below. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. If you like the show, if you like the series, please subscribe. My name is Branislav Berec. You've been watching Game in a Nutshell, and hope to see you next time.